If I had a nickel for every time a major animation studio released a movie in June of 2023 that had great animation and character designs, but a pretty underwhelming and predictable story that had one of the worst box office openings in the studio's history, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that happened twice, right? So, yeah, I just saw Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken, and I think most of you have not watched this movie because it is bombing. Like, I know I just made that joke, but Elemental has actually been, like, slowly earning its box office back. Ruby Gillman, on the other hand, nope. They literally yanked it from theaters, like, 2 weeks after it came out. And it's very clear DreamWorks had no faith in this movie. I honestly knew it was gonna flop, though, just because, one, it had basically no marketing. The first trailer literally came out in March of this past year, and then we got, like, 1 trailer after it, and then since, nothing. Like, I saw more advertisements for Strange World than I did for this movie, and the second reason is it came out the same day as Indiana Jones, which, yeah, I know didn't do amazing either, but it made, like, 10 times the it made 10 times the money this one made in its first weekend. So, yeah, this wasn't exactly a big hit, which, honestly, I think is kind of a shame. And the reception I've been seeing most people give this movie is, honestly, again, pretty much the same as Elemental, where it's good, but it's nothing great, and yeah, I think that's a fair way to sum it up. I had, much like Elemental, I had some faith in this movie that it would at least be decent, and I'd say that's overall what I got. Though I actually didn't think it was gonna be that way, because, like, weirdly, the first, like, 5 to 8 minutes of this movie, I actually wasn't really enjoying, and a part of me was worried, like, oh god, is this movie gonna suck? But thankfully, it does get a little better as it goes along, and it gets more and more interesting, namely as we, like, learn more about it and stuff. So the story of this movie is it follows a teenage girl named Ruby Gillman, who is, as you might guess, a Kraken. And yeah, she and her whole family are Krakens. They're disguising themselves as humans, even though their skin is blue. They say, oh, we're just from Canada, and everyone goes along with it. That's one of those things that's so silly, I can't help but enjoy it. So, basically, it starts out like she wants to ask her mom if she can go to prom, but her mother is worried because since the prom is on a cruise, her number one rule is that Ruby and the rest of her family cannot go in the ocean because if they do, they'll turn into like their full Kraken forms. So Ruby, much to her dismay, can't go because she was also hoping to ask out her crush, this boy she like tutors in math and stuff. And of course, her friends are also going without her. But eventually she decides to ignore her mother's request and ask her crush out anyway, but she ends up knocking him into the water, so she has to dive in to save him, and that's when we see her start to transform into not just a Kraken, but a giant Kraken, one the size of a building. She is able to save him, though, but the credit for the rescue ends up going to the new girl, Chelsea, who, if you saw the trailer and you saw people talking about this movie, she is probably the number one thing people were talking about because, yeah, mild spoiler, but, you know, it's in the trailer, and even then it's fairly obvious. She is not only the villain of this movie, but she is also a mermaid, and she looks eerily similar to another famous mermaid character, one that just got a remake a couple of months ago, and they even call her at one point a Little Mermaid. So, yeah, they knew what they were doing. So Ruby starts to freak out, she grows bigger and bigger to the point where she ends up completely destroying the school library. Her mother sees this, runs off, and she is able to calm her down. And I actually do enjoy the connection that Ruby and her mother have. Obviously, it's not entirely perfect, but you can tell that her mother really does care for her. But then her uncle shows up, and this is when she finally decides to tell her the truth, is that when they go in water, at least the females of their family, so Ruby and her mother, but not the father and son and her uncle. Oh yeah, Ruby has a brother, I forgot to mention that. When they go in the water, they grow massive and stuff. Why, you might ask? Well, we'll get into that in a minute. Anyway, Ruby is naturally pissed that her mother would keep this from her for her entire life, but her mother, of course, insists she was doing it for her safety, blah, 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 you know the drill at this point. Ruby winds up running away into the ocean with her uncle and going to, like, this undersea castle or whatever, and we meet her grandma, who is the queen of the Krakens, and that's why they can grow giant, is because they're royalty, so Ruby and her mother are princesses. Yeah, I'm sure this doesn't really sound too interesting, and I think that's the best way to sum up this movie, at least the story anyway. It's not bad, it's just kinda underwhelming, and most of the characters are kinda forgettable. Like, Ruby is a solid enough protagonist. You can relate to her. She does have some charm in, like, how awkward she can be, and most of the side characters are kinda whatever, like her friends and her crush or whatever, but they're honestly not in the movie that much, so it's not really that big of a deal. Even the connection she does have with her crush is at least decent. Nothing great, but it's solid enough. It works. So I'm sure you're wondering why I decided to actually see this movie, and well, I was actually curious from the start when I saw the trailer because I really love the character designs. Like, DreamWorks for years had characters that looked basically exactly the same. Like, you could say a character from Madagascar was actually from Over the Hedge, or vice versa, and I would probably believe it. But between stuff like this, The Bad Guys, and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, they've really been experimenting more with different art styles, and I really like it, and it helps the movie stand out a lot more. And without a doubt, the best thing about this movie, not much like Elemental, is the animation. Like, this movie, they did not need to go this hard with it. It looks gorgeous. The lighting, the textures, the environments, the instant stuff, it all looks incredible. I am amazed that they actually put this much effort into like the animation in itself when clearly the studio had no faith in it because they barely marketed it and yanked it from theaters 2 weeks after it came out. You can definitely tell the animators were having a lot of fun with this movie. Again, not just with stuff like that, but even just the way the characters move. It reminded me a lot of Hotel Transylvania in a way, where Ruby had a pretty distinct way of moving. Like, she'd just be standing talking, but she gets nervous, so like her leg literally wraps around the other one. Like, it's a little detail, but little touches like that are sprinkled throughout this movie, and it is really admirable. Of course, the writing was a bit hit and miss. Like, thankfully, the only jokes I feel like I'd be rolling my eyes at were kind of more towards the beginning. And as it goes on, we get some genuinely good laughs. Like, when Ruby first goes to meet her grandma, she hands her like a plate of cookies, and she says, "I made someone make it myself." Like, that's a great joke. Or when she's in the school, the announcer says, "Prepare yourselves for the last ounce of joy before you go into adulthood, prom." Like, again, the cynical person in me really loves jokes like that, especially in kids' films. Honestly, even stuff I didn't think would be funny end up being funnier later on, like when she goes giant, this ship captain or whatever starts trying to hunt her down, and at first I thought he was kind of annoying, but he ended up becoming probably the funniest character in the movie. He has like this little crab psychic that doesn't talk, he just like clicks his claws and stuff, and he genuinely got some really good laughs. Or, obviously, since this is like a 2023 movie, they do make some jokes about, like, streaming and internet culture and stuff, but even then, they do some funny stuff with it. Like, we find out her dad owns, like, a chip in a bottle store where he makes, you know, stuff like that, but he also streams himself, making it as a form of ASMR, almost like Bob Ross. Like, again, that's funny. Honestly, I really wish this movie focused a bit more on the Kraken stuff, because a lot of that was really creative. Like, not only, again, their designs are amazing, like, good God, I've never seen Kraken designs that look like this, and they're really cool, but we also find out they have a bunch of different powers, like camouflage, body armor, laser eyes, and stuff. Like, I wish they had focused a lot more on that, because that would have been really cool, but the most stuff we get is just basic stuff. Like, we learn that years ago there was a war between Krakens and mermaids, and, like, the queen of the mermaids had this trident, but Ruby's mother stopped her and, like, hid the trident away, etc. And, of course, that's when Chelsea, the mermaid villain, comes into play, because she claims she wants to help bring peace to them by using Ruby to acquire the trident, etc. And yeah, I know I am spoiling it, but let's face it, not only was it in the trailer, even if that wasn't in the trailer, it is very obvious that she is the villain. I would have been able to guess that from minute one, even if I didn't know beforehand. I think the one strength this movie has over Elemental is that it doesn't rely on as many cliches. Like, genuinely, there's a moment where, like, Ruby and Chelsea are talking in the bathroom, and Chelsea says to her, like, "You know what you need? You need a ditch day." I was genuinely very terrified that she was gonna say makeover, and when we get one of those, like, stupid makeover montages you see in every movie. Thankfully, that doesn't happen. We do get a brief little training montage, but I enjoy a good training montage, and it was actually pretty fun. Of course, it does follow some of the typical DreamWorks cliches, like they play generic pop songs in the movie, and thankfully they're not awful, but they're just kind of there, like, yeah, whatever. Honestly, I'm kind of sad this movie did as poorly as it did, because I feel like it could have benefited from a sequel. DreamWorks is known for making some really killer sequels. We've had Shrek 2, How to Train Your Dragon 2, Kung Fu Panda 2, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, even Madagascar 2. All of those were vast improvements over the first one. So I feel like this is another movie that could have benefited from it, but given its middling reception and the fact that it did worse than any other DreamWorks movie at the box office, I do not see that happening. But who knows? Maybe it'll develop a large cult following on streaming like many other movies have. You never know for sure. Overall, this movie was alright. I'm glad I saw it, but I don't think it's anything great. If you're curious, I would recommend checking it out. You'll probably have a good time, but if you saw the trailer and it didn't click with you, it's probably not going to do anything to, like, blow your mind or whatever. As far as DreamWorks movies go, I'd say this is pretty middle of the road. It's not going to actively piss you off like, I don't know, Boss Baby or Turbo or something, but it's also not going to blow you away like Kung Fu Panda or How to Train Your Dragon. I'd say this is on par with something like Madagascar 1 or Peabody and Sherman, where it's fine, but it's nothing great. I give it a solid 6 out of 10.